In 1887, Judge Winton Hale stunned Mississippi's planter elite when he announced that his adult son, an obese, violent man no one on the plantation could control, would be placed under the authority of a woman he called the most beautiful slave. He did not negotiate, did not explain. He simply handed his son over like a troublesome animal and ordered her to handle him. The other landowners said nothing, but every one of them knew why no overseer, no deputy, and no hired man had agreed to manage Augustus Hale anymore. By summer, the judge's ledgers had vanished. Half the workers were moving in lockstep behind the woman he tried to use as a tool, and Augustus himself had disappeared inside his own quarters without a single witness. What exactly happened after the judge forced his son into her hands? And why did every warning come too late for the Hale family? Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The sun rose bloody over the Hale plantation, painting the cotton fields crimson. Judge Winton Hale stood on his wide front porch, watching the light creep across land his family had held for 3 generations. His hands gripped the railing. The wood felt solid beneath his palms, reassuring. Everything looked proper from this distance. Orderly rows, workers already moving between the plants, the big house standing tall against the Mississippi sky. But proper appearances meant nothing when the foundation rotted underneath. He heard Augustus before he saw him. Heavy footsteps on the stairs, the creak of floorboards straining under weight. The judge's jaw tightened. His son emerged from the house, shirt already stained despite the early hour. Augustus was 28 years old and looked 50. Fat hung over his belt. His face was red and sweating in the morning cool. "Morning, Father." Augustus's voice carried that whining edge the judge despised. "You're late for inspections." "I was eating breakfast." "You're always eating." Augustus's expression darkened. The judge knew that look. The petulant anger of a child in a man's body. Dangerous and pathetic all at once. They walked the fields together, the judge moving with measured dignity while Augustus huffed beside him. Workers bent to their tasks as they approached. Smart. No one wanted Augustus's attention, but Augustus gave it anyway. He stopped beside an older man named Samuel, who was checking irrigation channels. "This section's flooding." Samuel kept his eyes down. "Yes, sir. I'm fixing it now." "Fixing it? Looks like you caused it, you worthless." Augustus kicked dirt at the man's face. Samuel flinched but didn't move away. The judge saw other workers freeze, watching from the corners of their eyes. "Augustus." The judge's voice was quiet, controlled. "We have other sections to inspect. I'm handling my responsibilities. You're wasting time." Augustus's face flushed darker. He kicked more dirt, then followed his father down the row. The judge felt eyes on his back. Judgment. From people he'd spent decades keeping under his boot. It burned like acid. This was the problem. Augustus couldn't maintain authority without descending into meaningless cruelty. He had no discipline, no strategy, just rage and appetite. The judge had built his power carefully after the war. He'd maneuvered through Reconstruction by knowing exactly how much pressure to apply and when to ease off. He'd cultivated the right relationship, paid the right bribes, maintained respectability while other planters lost everything. And Augustus was destroying it all. By mid-morning, they rode into town. The judge had business at the courthouse. Augustus insisted on coming, claiming he needed supplies. The judge knew better. His son wanted to be seen, to pretend at importance. They tied their horses outside Morrison's general store. The judge headed for the courthouse, while Augustus went inside. 10 minutes later, shouting erupted from the store. The judge was halfway across the square when he heard glass breaking. He turned and ran, not dignified, not controlled, but necessary. Inside the store, Augustus had a black man pinned against the counter. The man wore a Union Army coat, faded but clearly recognizable. Blood ran from his nose. Augustus held a broken bottle, jabbing it toward the veteran's face. "You think you can look at me?" Augustus screamed. "You think wearing that coat makes you somebody?" "Augustus!" The judge grabbed his son's arm. Augustus spun, wild-eyed. For a moment, the judge thought his son might use the bottle on him too. Then Augustus's expression crumpled. He dropped the glass and stumbled backward. The veteran straightened slowly, wiping blood from his face. Other customers stared. Mr. Morrison stood behind his counter, pale and silent. The judge pulled money from his pocket. "For the damages." He pushed Augustus toward the door. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. The judge saw Mrs. Patterson clutching her handbag, Reverend Cole frowning. Two men he recognized as journalists from up north, notebooks already open. The veteran emerged from the store. Blood stained his coat now. That damned Union coat. "Judge Hale," one journalist called out. "Would you care to comment on your son's attack?" The judge kept walking, dragging Augustus with him. The afternoon brought a parade of complaints. Mayor Hendricks stopped by the plantation, sweating and nervous. "Winton, people are talking. That man Augustus attacked? He's respected. War hero. The northern papers are already writing about it." 3 businessmen came next, polite but firm. "We can't afford this kind of attention. Federal authorities are looking for excuses to interfere." By evening, the judge sat in his office watching the sun set through tall windows. Orange light slanted across his desk. He'd spent 20 years rebuilding his influence, creating a careful balance between the old ways and new realities, walking the line that let men like him survive. Augustus was going to destroy it all unless the judge found a solution. He thought of Marceline. She worked in the house, had for years. Smart, composed. The kind of calm presence that could steady even the worst situations. He'd seen her diffuse tensions before. Speak quietly to angry workers. Manage difficult tasks without complaint. Maybe she could manage Augustus too. Channel his impulses somewhere less destructive. The judge rang the bell on his desk. Minutes later, Marceline appeared in the doorway. The sunset light fell across her face as she stood waiting, patient, watchful. "Come in," the judge said. "Close the door. We need to discuss your new responsibilities." The door clicked shut. Marceline stood before the judge's desk, hands folded at her waist. She'd learned long ago to make her body still, to breathe slow and steady, even when her heart hammered against her ribs. Judge Hale studied her like she was livestock he was considering for sale. She kept her eyes level, but not challenging. The sunset light made his face look carved from stone. "You're aware of my son's difficulties," he said. "Yes, sir. The incident today has created problems, political problems." He stood and walked to the window. "Augustus needs guidance, structure, someone to manage his worst impulses." Marceline said nothing. She felt the trap closing but couldn't see its shape yet. "You've always been reliable, intelligent, good at handling difficult situations." The judge turned to face her. "Starting immediately, you'll be assigned to Augustus's personal service. You'll manage his household, his schedule, keep him occupied and out of trouble." The words landed like stones in cold water. Marceline's stomach dropped, but her face remained calm. She'd survived worse announcements, worse situations. This was just another test of endurance. "I understand, sir. You'll move to the quarters attached to his rooms tonight. He's been informed of the arrangement." Translation: Augustus already knew. Was already planning how to use this power. "Yes, sir. I expect you to keep him manageable, Marceline. Your family's comfort depends on your success in this role." There it was, the threat wrapped in business language. Her mother still worked the kitchen garden despite her bad knees. Her younger brother and sister lived in the workers' cabins. All of them could be reassigned, sold, disappeared. "I'll do my duty, sir." Good. You're dismissed. Marceline walked to the door, each step measured. She felt the judge watching her back, testing for any sign of resistance or fear. She gave him nothing. Outside, she found Augustus waiting in the hallway. He looked like a child who'd been promised cake. His face was flushed with excitement and something darker. His eyes crawled over her in a way that made her skin feel dirty. "Father says you're mine now." His voice was thick, eager. "The judge has assigned me to help manage your household, sir." "Same thing." Augustus stepped closer. Too close. His breath smelled like whiskey and old meat. "You'll do what I say, when I say it. Understand?" "Yes, sir." "Say it properly." Marceline kept her voice level, respectful. "I understand, sir. I'm here to serve however you require." Augustus grinned. The expression made him look even more childish despite his bulk. "Get your things. I want you moved in before dark." She had few possessions to collect. A spare dress, a brush her mother had given her, a small Bible with her grandmother's name written inside the cover. She packed them in a cloth bag while other houseworkers watched with worried faces. "Be careful," whispered Clara, who worked in the laundry. "He's dangerous." Marceline nodded once. What else could she say? They both knew the truth. The walk to Augustus's quarters felt like a funeral march. Workers in the fields paused to watch her pass. She saw pity in their eyes, fear too. Everyone knew what proximity to Augustus meant. Bruises at minimum. Worst things possible. Augustus had rooms on the east side of the big house, separate from his father but still connected. His own small kingdom where the judge's rules didn't reach. A sitting room cluttered with dirty plates and empty bottles. A bedroom that reeked of sweat and unwashed sheets. And attached to that, a tiny room that had once been storage. "That's yours," Augustus said, gesturing at the storage room. "Keep it clean. Keep my rooms clean, too. I want breakfast at 7 sharp. Dinner at 6. No delays." "Yes, sir." He circled her slowly, looking for something. A reaction, maybe. Fear or anger he could punish. Marceline gave him nothing, just polite attention. "You think you're smart, don't you?" Augustus said suddenly. "Father thinks you're so clever, so composed. We'll see how long that lasts. I'm here to serve, sir. Whatever you need." Her calm tone seemed to confuse him. He'd expected pleading, maybe, or defiance he could crush. Instead, she offered perfect submission without any hint of emotion underneath. It threw off his rhythm. "I want coffee. Now." "Of course, sir. How do you prefer it prepared?" Augustus blinked. "Hot. Strong. Don't make me wait." Marceline found the kitchen area. The stove was cold, the coffee tin nearly empty. She worked quickly, building a fire, measuring grounds. Her hands stayed steady even as her mind raced. This was survival. Pure and simple. She'd survived the judge's household for years by being useful without being threatening, by anticipating needs, by making herself seem essential rather than disposable. She could do the same with Augustus, but Augustus was different from his father. The judge was cruel with purpose. Augustus was cruel from weakness, from the desperate need to prove himself important. That made him unpredictable, dangerous in ways the judge never was. When she brought the coffee, Augustus took it without thanks. He dismissed her with a wave. "Go to your room. Don't come out until I call you." The storage room was barely large enough for the narrow cot that had been shoved inside. A single candle provided light. The window was too small to climb through. She set down her bag and sat on the thin mattress. Night had fallen completely now. Through the walls she heard Augustus moving around his rooms, breaking something, cursing, drinking. Marceline closed her eyes and let herself shake for exactly 30 seconds. That was all she allowed. Then she drew a slow breath and forced her body still again. She had to survive this, had to keep Augustus manageable enough that he didn't destroy her or her family. Had to find some way to maintain control in a situation designed to strip all control away. Think, plan, Survive. Augustus wanted someone to dominate, to break. If she gave him perfect obedience, he might grow bored instead of violent. If she made herself useful, he might keep her alive out of convenience. And if she paid attention, really paid attention, she might learn things. The judge had given her access to Augustus's private space, to his papers, his conversations, his habits. Information was power, even for someone with no power at all. She thought of her mother, her siblings, the other workers who depended on the fragile stability she'd helped maintain. The candle burned down slowly. Shadows moved across the cramped walls. Marceline reached out and pinched the flame between her fingers. Darkness fell complete. In that darkness, she whispered words only she could hear. "I will endure this. I will survive. I will find a way." The vow hung in the air like smoke, like prayer, like the beginning of something that might one day become vengeance. But for now, it was simply endurance. One night, then another, however many it took. She lay down on the thin mattress and closed her eyes, forcing her breathing slow and steady, despite the fear coiled in her chest. This was the gift the judge had given his son. This was the cage he'd locked her inside. She would survive it. She had no other choice. Morning light came gray through the narrow window. Marceline woke before dawn like always, her body trained to anticipate need before it was spoken. The house was quiet except for Augustus's snoring through the wall. Heavy, wet sounds that made the silence between each breath feel dangerous. She rose and smoothed her dress, checked her reflection in the small mirror propped on the windowsill. Composed, calm, ready. The kitchen was dark when she entered. She built the fire carefully, each motion precise. Coffee first, strong and hot like he demanded. Then breakfast. She'd watched him eat yesterday, noted his preferences. Eggs fried in butter until the edges crisped. Thick slices of ham. Biscuits with honey. Too much food for any reasonable person, but Augustus wasn't reasonable. She arranged everything on the tray, checked the temperature of the coffee, made sure the napkin was folded exactly right. When she knocked on his door, the snoring stopped. Shuffling sounds. A grunt. "Enter." Augustus sat up in bed, looking like something dredged from swamp water. His nightshirt was stained, his face puffy and creased from sleep. But his eyes were alert enough, watching her for any sign of disgust or judgment. Marceline's expression remained neutral, pleasant even. "Good morning, sir. I've brought your breakfast." She set the tray across his lap and stepped back. Not too far, just enough to show respect, without seeming afraid. Augustus picked up a fork and stabbed at the eggs, chewed slowly, testing them maybe, looking for some fault to punish. "Coffee's hot," he said finally. Not quite a complaint. "Yes, sir. Just how you prefer it." He grunted again and ate in silence for several minutes. Marceline stood perfectly still, hands folded in front of her, waiting. This was the dangerous time. Morning Augustus could go either way, depending on how the alcohol sat in his belly and what dreams had troubled his sleep. "The workers," he said suddenly, "they look at you different." Marceline's pulse quickened, but her face stayed calm. "Sir? Yesterday, when you walked past, they looked respectful." He said the word like it tasted strange. "They don't look at me like that." Truth and opportunity mixed together in that complaint. She chose her words carefully. "Perhaps they need to see your authority differently, sir. Your father gives orders through fear. But you could show them you're capable of leadership, of making smart decisions that prove your competence." Augustus stopped chewing. His small eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "The workers respond to strength, yes, but also to fairness when it serves a purpose." She kept her tone respectful, thoughtful, like she was helping him solve a puzzle. "If you granted small improvements, they'd work harder, be more productive. It would reflect well on your management abilities." Small improvements. Augustus set down his fork. Interest flickered across his face. "Like what?" Lighter workloads for the older workers, perhaps. They're slowing down and causing delays. If you assigned them less strenuous tasks, the younger ones could move faster without waiting. Production would increase. She watched him turn this over in his mind, looking for the trick, the catch. And you'd get credit for the efficiency, Marceline added quietly. Your father would see you managing things well. That landed. Augustus's expression shifted. The idea of proving himself to the judge, of being seen as competent instead of embarrassing, clearly appealed to something desperate inside him. What else? He asked. Extra rations from the smokehouse. Well-fed workers are stronger work. And perhaps suspending whippings for a trial period. Fear makes people slow and clumsy. A calm workforce is more effective. Augustus pushed the tray aside and swung his legs out of bed. His bulk made the frame creak. You think you're clever. I think you're capable of being an effective master, sir. If you choose to be. The flattery was obvious, but Augustus wanted to believe it anyway. Wanted to imagine himself as something other than his father's disappointing failure. Marceline could see the hunger for validation written across his face. Fine. He stood, his nightshirt hanging like a tent. We'll try it. Your suggestion. For 1 week. If production doesn't improve, we go back to the old way, and you'll regret wasting my time. Thank you, sir. I believe you'll see excellent results. Get out. I need to dress. Marceline left quickly, closing the door behind her. In the hallway, she allowed herself one slow breath, then another. It had worked. The first small manipulation had succeeded. By afternoon, word had spread through the plantation like water through cracked ground. Augustus had given orders. Lighter duties for the elderly. Extra food from the smokehouse. No whippings unless he personally authorized them. The workers moved through their tasks with something that looked almost like hope. Marceline watched from Augustus's sitting room window as old Samuel straightened his back for the first time in months, as Clara accepted extra cornmeal with shaking hands, as the field workers whispered to each other, afraid to believe but unable to help it. She turned back to the desk, where Augustus's papers lay scattered. He'd gone to town to brag about his new management approach, leaving her to organize his affairs. The ledgers were buried under correspondence and bills. She pulled them out carefully, noting the entries. The judge's handwriting documenting sales, purchases, debts, illegal transactions with northern carpetbaggers, bribes paid to local officials. Everything recorded because the judge was arrogant enough to believe no one would dare look. Marceline memorized key dates and amounts, noted patterns. Then she carefully returned everything to its original disorder. That evening, when she brought Augustus his dinner, she found him in a good mood, almost cheerful. The overseer says the cotton got weighed faster today, he announced. Your idea about reassigning the old ones worked. I'm pleased to hear it, sir. Your judgment was sound. Augustus beamed, actually beamed, like a child praised for tying his shoes. After he dismissed her, Marceline waited until full dark. Then she slipped out through the kitchen entrance. The workers' cabins stood in rows beyond the big house, rough structures that leaked in rain and froze in winter. She found Thomas first. He was young, strong, and smart enough to stay quiet when it mattered. They spoke in whispers behind his cabin. Can you read? She asked. Some. My mama taught me before she passed. Good. I need you to start keeping track of things. Who gets reassigned where? What supplies come in and out? Anything unusual the judge or Augustus do? Can you do that without being obvious? Thomas studied her face in the moonlight. You planning something? I'm planning to survive. We all are. But survival might require information. He nodded slowly. I can do it. Who else should know? Clara. Samuel, if his memory's still sharp. Maybe 2 others you trust completely. No more than that. And Thomas, if anyone asks, we never spoke tonight. Yes, ma'am. She moved between cabins, careful and quick, building a network of eyes and ears, people who would watch and remember and tell her what they saw. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. On the big house veranda, Judge Hale stood with his evening cigar. The smoke curled up into darkness while he looked out over his diminished kingdom. The overseer had reported the day's improvements. Augustus actually managing something successfully for once. Workers cooperating instead of sulking. Production numbers holding steady instead of declining. The judge drew on his cigar and let the smoke out slow. Maybe the solution really had been that simple. Give the boy something to control, someone to manage, keep him occupied and useful instead of destructive. Marceline had proven more valuable than he'd expected. She'd found a way to handle Augustus that the judge himself had never managed. It was almost impressive. He flicked ash over the railing and watched it drift down into darkness. Maybe things will actually turn around, he muttered to himself. The words felt strange in his mouth. Hopeful. He didn't trust hope much anymore. But for now, tonight, things seemed stable, almost manageable. The judge finished his cigar and went inside, leaving the veranda empty and dark. The week passed like a held breath. Augustus stayed calm, calmer than anyone could remember. His morning rages softened into grumbling. His afternoon violence faded into restless pacing. Marceline's careful flattery and strategic suggestions kept him occupied with thoughts of competence and authority instead of cruelty. The workers moved through their days without the constant terror of beatings. They ate slightly better, slept slightly easier. It wasn't freedom, but it was a kind of relief they'd almost forgotten existed. Pre-dawn light had just begun to gray the eastern sky when Marceline slipped from the big house. The grass was wet with dew, the air cool enough to raise goosebumps on her arms. She moved quickly between shadows until she reached the old tobacco barn, abandoned since before the war, but still standing. Thomas was already there. So was Clara, and a man named Jacob, who'd worked the Hale land for 40 years. They stood close together, voices low. "Morning," Marceline whispered. "Morning," Thomas replied. He pulled a folded paper from his shirt. "Wrote down what you asked. The judge met with a man from Vicksburg 3 days back. They argued about money. The man said something about debts coming due." Marceline took the paper and tucked it inside her dress. "Good. What else?" Clara spoke next, her voice thin but steady. "The overseer's been marking supplies wrong in his book. Says we got 20 pounds of salt, but I only counted 15. Same with the coffee and flour. He's skimming. And probably selling what he takes," Jacob added. "I seen him load a wagon last Thursday night. Covered the back with canvas like he didn't want nobody seeing what was under it." Marceline nodded, filing every detail away. "Keep watching. Write down dates and amounts if you can. The judge thinks he's untouchable because he controls the local courts. But if we can prove he's breaking federal trade laws, outside authorities might actually act." "That's a lot of ifs," Thomas said quietly. "It is, but it's more than we had last week." They separated before the sun fully rose. Marceline returned to the big house and began preparing Augustus's breakfast. Eggs, toast, bacon, coffee. The routine that had become her daily performance. When she entered his room, Augustus was already awake, sitting on the edge of his bed in his nightshirt, looking somehow smaller than usual, uncertain. "I had a bad dream," he said, as she set down the tray. Marceline kept her expression sympathetic. "I'm sorry to hear that, sir. Dreams can be troubling. My father was in it. He was—" Augustus trailed off, his face flushing. "Never mind. It was stupid." She waited, knowing silence would pull more from him than questions would. "He was laughing at me," Augustus finally admitted, his voice small and bitter, "telling everyone I was useless, that I'd always be useless. You're not useless, sir. This past week has proven that. The workers are more productive. The overseer reported improved numbers. You've managed things well." Augustus looked up at her with something like gratitude, something desperate and needy. "You really think so?" "I know so. You've made smart decisions, shown real leadership." He ate his breakfast in silence after that, but his mood seemed lighter, less volatile. When he finished, he pushed the tray aside and stood. "I want you to help me with more of the paperwork," he said. "The ledgers and correspondence, all of it. You're better at organizing than I am." Marceline's heart beat faster, but she kept her voice calm. "I'd be honored, sir. Though perhaps we should inform your father? I wouldn't want him to think you're—" "I don't care what he thinks." Augustus's jaw tightened. "He gave you to me. That means you answer to me, not him. I'll tell him myself that you're managing my affairs now." "Of course, sir. Whatever you think is best." By midday, Marceline sat at Augustus's desk with stacks of papers spread before her. Bills, letters, contracts, and most importantly, the judge's private ledgers, the ones that documented transactions the old man wanted, kept quiet. She worked carefully, making notes in her mind, memorizing names and numbers. The judge had been selling Reconstruction-allocated farmland to northern speculators while claiming it remained in local hands. He'd accepted bribes from railroad developers, falsified tax records, used his position to seize property from black farmers who couldn't prove ownership in his court. Every page revealed another crime, another betrayal of the law he claimed to uphold. Augustus wandered in and out through the afternoon, sometimes watching her work, sometimes just sitting nearby like he needed her presence to feel settled. His dependence was growing. She could see it in how he looked at her, like she was the only person who'd ever made him feel capable, valued. It was pathetic and useful. "You're different from other people," he said once, standing by the window. "You don't treat me like I'm what everyone says I am." "You're what you choose to be, sir. Nothing more or less." He seemed to like that answer, seemed to straighten a little under the weight of it. That evening, the judge found Augustus in the parlor, drinking, but not yet drunk, almost relaxed. "I hear you've been giving Marceline access to the accounts," the judge said, his voice carefully neutral. Augustus looked up. "She handles everything now. She's good at it. Better than me." The judge's expression tightened. "Everything?" "The paperwork, the scheduling. She even suggested a new rotation for the field workers that's increased output by—" "Augustus." The judge's voice hardened. "Those ledgers contain private business, family business. You understand that? She's trustworthy. She makes me look competent. That's not the point." "Then what is?" Augustus's temper flickered. "You gave her to me. Said I should keep myself occupied. Well, this is how I'm doing it. And it's working." The judge studied his son, calculation moving behind his eyes. Finally, he nodded once, stiff. "Just be careful what you show her. Some matters remain confidential." "Fine. Whatever you say." The judge left, but his suspicion hung in the air like smoke. After dark, Marceline met Thomas and Clara at the smokehouse. She carried papers carefully copied during her afternoon at Augustus's desk. They worked by candlelight, lifting floorboards in the back corner where meat had once hung to cure. "If we hide them here," Thomas whispered, "and the judge finds them—" "He won't look here," Marceline replied. "He barely remembers this place exists, and if something happens to me, you'll know where the evidence is. You can get it to people who might actually use it." They wrapped the papers in oilcloth, tucked them beneath the boards, replaced everything carefully. The records were insurance, proof, ammunition for a war that hadn't quite started yet. When they finished, Clara touched Marceline's arm. "You're risking everything doing this. We all are. Every day we're alive on this land, we're risking everything." They slipped away separately. Marceline waited until she was alone. Then she closed the smokehouse door, her hands shaking slightly as she secured the latch. Her heart pounded against her ribs, hard and fast. The copied ledgers were hidden. The network of watchers was growing. Augustus's dependence on her was deepening, every piece moving into place. But the judge was suspicious now, and suspicion from a man like Winton Hale was its own kind of danger. Marceline pressed her palm against the rough wood of the smokehouse door, felt its solidity, its realness. Then she turned and walked back toward the big house, her heart still pounding, but her expression perfectly calm. 2 mornings later, Augustus paced his study like a caged animal, his face flushed, his breathing heavy. Marceline stood near the doorway, waiting for the storm to pass. "My father doesn't respect me," Augustus finally said, his voice thick with humiliation. "Last night at dinner, he told the Robinsons I was finding my way, like I'm some child who needs guidance, in front of guests, in my own house. That must have hurt, sir." It was degrading. Augustus slammed his palm against the desk. "I want to show him I'm capable. I want everyone to see that I can run this place better than he ever did." Marceline moved closer, her expression thoughtful. "You've already made improvements this past fortnight. The workers are more productive, the fields are yielding better, but perhaps what you need is something more official, something that proves you're not just managing day to day, but actually leading." Augustus looked at her. "What do you mean?" "A formal structure, a document that shows you've delegated authority properly, the way real businessmen do." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You could transfer operational oversight to me for efficiency. It would free you to focus on the bigger picture, finances, politics, planning, and it would show your father you understand modern management. Operational oversight." Augustus repeated the words slowly, tasting them. "That sounds impressive." "It is. Northern factories do it all the time. Owners delegate to managers. It's a sign of intelligence, not weakness." Augustus sat down heavily in his chair. "Would you write it up, the document?" "Of course, sir. I'll make it very official, very impressive." She spent the morning drafting the statement, each word chosen with precision. She wrote that Augustus Hale, in recognition of improved plantation efficiency, hereby transferred day-to-day operational oversight to Marceline for purposes of streamlined management and increased productivity, that she would oversee work assignments, resource allocation, and worker welfare, that her authority derived directly from his own and reflected his modernized approach to estate management. When she brought it to him, he read it twice, slowly. "This makes me sound competent," he said, something like wonder in his voice. "Because you are making a competent decision, sir." He signed it, his signature large and looping. Then he pressed his seal into the wax. Official, binding, real. Marceline folded the document carefully and tucked it into her dress. Her hands wanted to shake, but she kept them steady. "Thank you, sir. This will help tremendously." "Good. Good." Augustus leaned back, looking satisfied. "Now, maybe my father will see I'm not the fool he thinks I am." By noon, Marceline had shared the news with Thomas, Clara, and Jacob. They gathered briefly near the well, speaking in low voices while pretending to work. "It's real?" Thomas asked, his eyes wide. "It's real. Signed and sealed. I have operational authority." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means, today, nobody gets whipped. Nobody gets beaten. Nobody works past sunset." Marceline's voice was quiet but fierce. "It means we try something new, even if it's just for one day." The word spread through the workers like wind through grass. Marceline saw it in their faces as the afternoon unfolded. The way shoulders relaxed slightly. The way people glanced at each other with something that wasn't quite hope yet, but wasn't despair either. Old Samuel, who'd been beaten 2 weeks prior for working too slowly, straightened up from the cotton row and stretched his back. Nobody shouted at him. The overseer, having received new instructions from Augustus that morning, just watched silently. Near the tobacco barn, 2 young men laughed at something. actually laughed, the sound strange and precious in air that usually held only silence or pain. Clara started singing while she worked. Not loud, but not whispered either. A hymn her grandmother had taught her. Other voices joined in softly, the melody drifting across the fields like something fragile and new. Marceline walked through the workers' quarters in late afternoon and found her mother sitting outside their cabin. Just sitting, not working herself to exhaustion, not tending someone else's needs, just resting in the shade with her eyes closed and her face peaceful. Marceline's throat tightened. She approached quietly and sat down beside her. "You look tired, Mama." Her mother opened her eyes. They were clouded with age, but still sharp. "I'm resting. First time in, I don't know how long I've rested in daylight without fear." "I know." "What you're doing?" Her mother's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "What you're doing is dangerous, child." "I know that too. But it's working." Marceline nodded. "It's working." Her mother reached over and took her hand, squeezed it once, hard, then let go. They sat together in silence, listening to the distant singing from the fields. As sunset approached, workers finished their tasks and headed toward their cabins. Nobody rushed. Nobody looked over their shoulders expecting violence. The overseer had already retreated to his house, clearly uncertain how to function in this new arrangement. Marceline stood near the big house and watched families gathering for evening meals, watched children playing without being shushed into terrified silence, watched people moving through space like they had a right to exist in it. Thomas approached, his expression cautious but alive. "How long can this last?" "I don't know. But we have the document. We have the records hidden. We have proof of everything the judge has done. We're building something real here, Thomas. Something that might actually hold." "You really think we can break them?" "The Hales?" Marceline looked toward the judge's office window. Dark now. The old man had gone to town on business. "I think we have more power than they realize. And I think if we're smart and careful, we can use it." Thomas nodded slowly. "People are talking about tomorrow, about what it might be like if tomorrow is like today. Tell them to hope carefully, but tell them to hope." After full dark, Marceline walked out past the workers' quarters toward the fields. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the cotton plants. They looked almost beautiful in that light, almost peaceful. She thought about the document tucked safely in her room, about the ledgers hidden in the smokehouse, about the network of people watching and recording and waiting, about Augustus's signature on paper that gave her authority she'd never imagined holding. For the first time since the judge had given her to his son, Marceline felt something bigger than survival. She felt possibility. The system that had held these people down for generations, that had held her down, had owned her, had treated her like property. That system had cracks in it now. Real cracks. And she had her hands in those cracks, pulling them wider. The Hale family's hold was weakening. She could feel it, see it in every relaxed shoulder, every quiet laugh, every moment of peace that had happened today. Change was near. Real change. The kind that didn't come from hoping or praying, but from action and strategy and risk. Marceline stood in the moonlit field and let herself believe it. Let herself imagine a future where this land belonged to the people who worked it, where fear was replaced by something else, where she wasn't anyone's possession. The moon cast her shadow long across the cotton rows. She looked at it, her own shadow, dark and solid and real, and felt certain of what came next. They were going to win. Judge Winton Hale found the document Tuesday morning. He'd been searching Augustus's desk for the quarterly tax records, irritated that his son never kept things properly organized. The drawer stuck. He yanked it hard. Papers spilled across the floor. Most of it was garbage. Bills Augustus hadn't paid. Letters Augustus hadn't answered. But one sheet caught the judge's eye because of the official seal pressed into red wax. He picked it up. Read it. Read it again. His face went white. Then red. Then a deep purple that made the veins in his neck stand out like ropes. "Augustus!" The bellow shook the walls. Servants in the kitchen froze mid-task. Marceline, carrying clean linens upstairs, stopped on the landing. Augustus came stumbling out of his bedroom, still in his nightshirt, despite the late morning hour. "What? What is it?" The judge strode down the hallway and shoved the document against his son's chest, hard enough to make him stagger backward. "What in God's name is this?" Augustus took the paper with trembling hands, looked at it. His face went slack. That's the management document. Marceline said. The judge's voice dropped to something low and dangerous. "You gave operational authority over my plantation to a colored woman because Marceline said. It was supposed to make me look competent. She said it was modern management." Modern management. The judge grabbed his son by the nightshirt and slammed him against the wall. Augustus squealed. "You fool! You absolute fool! Do you understand what you've done? I was trying to improve things. The workers have been more productive. The workers have been planning." The judge released him with a shove of disgust. "I've heard whispers, questions about my accounts, my business dealings. Someone's been gathering information, and it's not the workers who can barely read. It's her. You gave her access to everything." Augustus's face crumpled. "She was helping me. She made me look good. She made you look like a simpleton." "Which you are." The judge paced, his boots heavy on the floorboards. "Do you know what Samuel Morrison told me yesterday in town? He said his stable boy heard that the Hale plantation was under new management, under colored management. Do you understand how that makes us look? Do you understand what the other landowners are saying? I didn't mean. You never mean anything. You're a disgrace." The judge stopped pacing and pointed at his son. "This ends today, right now. I'm selling her." Augustus blinked. "Selling who?" "Marceline. She'll be gone by week's end. I know a trader in Natchez who ships labor west. She can work herself to death on a Texas ranch for all I care." Something flickered across Augustus's face. "But she's been useful. She's the only one who's been manipulating you like a child manipulates a parent with tears. Wake up, Augustus. She's been using you, getting information, building influence, and you signed away our authority because she flattered your pathetic ego." Augustus's expression shifted, the confusion turning to something uglier, something defensive and mean. "She tricked me. Obvious. She made me think I was being smart. She made me look like a fool. You are a fool. But yes, she used you." The judge walked to his office door. "I'll draft the sale papers this afternoon. She'll be gone before she can cause more damage. Everyone will know." Augustus's voice rose, panicky and shrill. "Everyone will know she made me look stupid. They'll laugh. They already laugh at me, and this will make it worse. Then perhaps you'll finally learn to think before you act." The judge went into his office and slammed the door. Augustus stood in the hallway, breathing hard, his face red and blotchy, his hands shaking. Marceline descended the stairs slowly, still holding the linens. She'd heard everything, every word. Her mind raced, calculating options, escape routes, possibilities. Augustus saw her. Their eyes met. She watched him process it, watched the humiliation turn to rage, watched him decide who to blame. "You." His voice was thick. "This is your fault." "Sir, I only—" "You tricked me. You made me sign that document. You made me look incompetent in front of my father, in front of the whole county." Marceline kept her voice calm. "I was trying to help improve efficiency." "Liar." He took a step toward her. "You were using me, getting information. turning the workers against us. My father's right. You've been manipulating everything. She wanted to run. Every instinct screamed to run, but running would make it worse. So she stood still and kept her face neutral. I apologize if I overstepped, sir. Apology won't fix this. You're being sold. Gone by week's end. And good riddance. He shoved past her and went back into his room. The door slammed. Marceline stood on the stairs, gripping the linen so hard her knuckles went white. Sold. Out of the county. Away from her mother. Away from the workers who depended on her. Away from everything they'd built. She had 4 days, maybe 5. The day crawled past in tense silence. The judge stayed in his office, drafting paperwork. Augustus stayed in his room, drinking and muttering to himself. Marceline moved through her tasks mechanically, her mind working frantically. By evening, word had spread through the workers' quarters. Thomas found her near the smokehouse after dark. We heard about the sale. It's true. We can't let them. There's nothing to do. Not yet. Just keep the documents hidden. Keep the records safe. If I'm sold, someone else will have to use them. Thomas looked stricken. We can't do this without you. You'll have to. Marceline's voice was steady, but her heart hammered. Tell everyone to stay calm. Don't do anything that draws attention. We'll figure something out. But she didn't know what. For the first time since this started, she didn't have a plan. As full dark settled, Augustus emerged from his room. Marceline heard him stumbling down the stairs, heard the clink of bottles. He was drinking heavily. She could tell by his footsteps, uneven and dragging. She retreated to her small room off the kitchen, closed the door, sat on the edge of her narrow bed, and tried to think. Voices drifted from the main house. Augustus talking to himself. His words slurred and angry, blaming her for everything, for his father's contempt, for the town's mockery, for his own failures. The voices got louder, closer. Marceline stood up, heavy footsteps in the hallway, stumbling, furious. She backed toward the far wall. The door burst open, slammed against the wall so hard the frame cracked. Augustus filled the doorway, swaying, his face twisted with rage and humiliation and drink. His eyes found her, fixed on her with something murderous. You ruined me! Marceline's back pressed against the wall. Her mind went very cold, very clear. This was it. You ruined me! Augustus lunged forward. His massive weight carried him across the small room faster than Marceline expected. She dodged sideways. His shoulder crashed into the wall where she'd been standing. He spun, surprisingly quick for someone so drunk, grabbed for her arm, caught her sleeve. The fabric tore as she wrenched away. Hold still! His voice was a roar. Spit flew from his mouth. You don't get to walk away from this. Marceline's hand found the wash basin on the small table beside her bed. Heavy ceramic. She swung it without thinking. It caught Augustus on the side of his head with a dull crack. He staggered, touched his temple, looked at his fingers. Blood smeared across them. That made him angrier. He came at her again, both arms reaching, trying to grab her throat. Marceline ducked under his grasp and shoved him hard. He was too drunk to keep his balance. He stumbled backward, arms windmilling, and crashed into the narrow wardrobe against the far wall. The furniture toppled. Augustus went down with it, cursing and thrashing. Marceline grabbed the only other thing within reach, the wooden chair from beside her bed. Simple pine construction. Hard corners. Augustus pushed himself up on his hands and knees, breathing like a wounded animal, his face purple with rage. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to... She brought the chair down. It struck him across the shoulders. He grunted and collapsed forward. She hit him again. And again. Driven by pure terror and the absolute certainty that if she stopped, he would get up and finish what he'd started. The chair splintered on the fourth blow, legs breaking off. She kept hold of the seat portion and swung it once more at his head as he tried to rise. Augustus made a wet, choking sound, fell sideways. His body convulsed once, twice. Then, nothing. Marceline stood frozen, gripping the broken chair, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her whole body shaking so hard she could barely stand. Augustus didn't move. She dropped the chair remnants. The clatter seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Blood pooled slowly beneath his head. His eyes stared at nothing. His chest didn't rise. Dead. She'd killed him. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her legs gave out and she sat down hard on the floor, still staring at Augustus's body, at what she'd done, at what she'd had to do. Footsteps rushed down the hallway. The door burst open wider. Thomas appeared first, then Samuel, then 3 others from the quarters. They must have heard the noise, the shouting, the crashes. They stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene. Augustus's massive body sprawled on the floor, the broken furniture, the blood. Marceline sitting against the wall, shaking. "Sweet Jesus," Thomas whispered. "He came after me." Marceline's voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant. "He was going to kill me. I couldn't." "We know." Samuel moved into the room, stepping carefully around Augustus. He knelt beside the body, checked for breathing, for a pulse. He looked up at the others and shook his head once. "The judge will hang her," one of the women said from the doorway. "He'll hang all of us. Not if he doesn't find out." Thomas looked at Marceline. "Can you stand?" She nodded. Let him help her to her feet. Her legs still trembled, but held her weight. "We move him now," Thomas said, "before anyone in the main house wakes up, before the judge finds him here." "Where?" Samuel asked. "Old storage shed behind the tobacco barn. Nobody goes there this time of year. We can figure out what to do with him later." The men worked quickly. They wrapped Augustus's body in Marceline's bedsheet. She'd have to burn it anyway. No amount of washing would save it. 4 of them lifted him. His weight made them grunt with effort. But they managed. They carried him out through the kitchen door and into the darkness beyond. The women stayed behind. One began mopping the blood with rags. Another gathered the broken chair pieces. A third helped Marceline change into clean clothes. She hadn't realized her dress was splattered. "Burn these," the woman said, taking Marceline's ruined clothing, along with the rags. Before sunrise, they moved with practiced efficiency. Years of covering tracks, hiding evidence, protecting each other from consequences they didn't deserve, but would suffer anyway. Within an hour, the room looked normal. Almost. The wardrobe still sat crooked where it had fallen. The floor showed damp spots where they'd scrubbed away blood. But in dim light, it might pass inspection. The men returned without the body. Thomas pulled Marceline aside. "You need to think," he said quietly. "The judge will notice Augustus missing by mid-morning at the latest. We have maybe 6 hours before he starts asking questions." "I know. The documents, the evidence we've been gathering. We need to use it now, today. We can't wait anymore." Marceline's mind felt sluggish. Shock still numbed her thoughts. But Thomas was right. Everything had accelerated. The careful plan she'd been building for months, it had to happen immediately. "The journalist," she said slowly, "the one from New York who's been asking about plantation conditions. He's staying at the Morrison Hotel in town. Get the documents to him this morning. All of them. The ledgers, the witness statements, everything about the judge's illegal dealings." She gripped Thomas's arm. "It has to be today. Before noon. Before the judge realizes what's happened. What about you? I stay here. Act normal. If I run, he'll know something's wrong immediately." "Marceline!" "I killed his son. When he finds out, he'll want me dead regardless. Our only chance is to destroy him first. Publicly. Completely. So he can't touch any of us." Thomas looked like he wanted to argue, but he nodded instead. "I'll take the papers myself. Leave within the hour." The others dispersed back to their quarters. Marceline sat on her bed, now covered with a different blanket, the blood-stained one gone. She couldn't stop shaking. She'd killed a man, felt his skull crack under her hands, watched the life leave his eyes. She felt no guilt about it. That was what disturbed her most. Augustus had meant to murder her. She'd simply been stronger, faster, more desperate to survive. But the judge wouldn't see it that way. Nobody in power would see it that way. Outside, the sky began to lighten. The first hint of dawn crept across the eastern horizon. Birds started their morning songs. The plantation would wake soon. Marceline stood and walked to her small window, looked toward the main house where Judge Hale still slept, unaware his son was dead, unaware his whole world was about to collapse. Morning light crept across her floor in thin golden lines. Everything had changed. Sunlight crawled through the kitchen house windows. Marceline sat at the long wooden table, hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee she hadn't touched. The liquid had gone cold an hour ago. Around her, workers moved with quiet purpose. Thomas spread documents across the table's surface. Samuel organized papers into careful stacks. 3 women stood by the door, keeping watch for anyone approaching from the main house. Marceline's hands still trembled. She pressed them flat against the table to make them stop. The shaking came from somewhere deep inside her body, beyond her control. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Augustus falling, heard the wet sound his skull made against the floor. "Marceline," Thomas touched her shoulder gently. "We need you focused." She looked up at him, nodded, forced herself to breathe slowly. There would be time for breaking down later. Maybe. If they survived this. "Show me what we have," she said. Thomas laid out the evidence they'd collected over months of careful planning. The judge's account ledgers, showing money skimmed from crop sales. Letters proving illegal trade deals with corrupt merchants. Witness statements from workers, each one signed with an X or a shaky signature. Lists of beatings, records of stolen wages, documentation of children sold away from their families. Years of crimes, all carefully noted. "We need 2 packets," Marceline said. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "Identical copies. One goes north to the journalist. The other goes to federal authorities." "The journalist's in town," Samuel said. "Morrison Hotel. I can reach him by mid-afternoon." "No." Marceline shook her head. "You're too visible. The judge knows your face. If he's already looking for Augustus, he'll notice you missing." "Then who?" "Marcus." She looked at the youngest man present, barely 20 years old. "You delivered vegetables to town last week. The judge doesn't pay attention to you. You can move through without drawing notice." Marcus nodded, his jaw set with determination. "I'll get it to him." "For the federal packet," Thomas said, "we need someone who can ride hard, cover serious distance. Federal marshals probably 2 days north, maybe 3. "I'll go." The voice came from the doorway. Rebecca stepped forward. She was older than Marceline, maybe 45, with gray threading through her hair. But she'd grown up with horses, could ride better than most men. "It's dangerous," Marceline said. "Everything we're doing is dangerous." Rebecca's expression was calm. "I can handle it. My daughter's safe with her father's people in Tennessee. I've got nothing holding me here except this fight." Marceline studied her face, saw the same determined fury she felt in her own chest, the same exhaustion with living under the Hales' cruelty. "All right," she said. "You take the federal packet." They worked through the morning, making careful copies of each document. The women who could read and write helped duplicate the witness statements. Others wrapped the papers in oilcloth to protect them from weather. They packed everything into 2 leather satchels taken from the tack room. Around mid-morning, voices carried from the main house. The judge, shouting for Augustus, calling his name through the hallways. Everyone in the kitchen house froze. "He's realized," Thomas whispered. Through the window, they watched the judge emerge onto the back porch, his face red with anger and confusion. He bellowed Augustus's name toward the quarters, toward the fields, his voice carrying across the plantation grounds. "Augustus! Where the hell are you?" Workers in the field stopped and looked up. Marceline could see them exchanging glances, careful not to react too much, not to show they knew anything. The judge stormed back inside. Minutes later, he emerged again with two of his overseers, started sending them in different directions to search. The stable, the smokehouse, the storage buildings. "They're looking everywhere," Samuel said quietly. "It's only a matter of time before someone thinks to check the old tobacco shed. Then we move faster." Marceline turned to Marcus and Rebecca. "You both leave within the hour. Marcus first, since town's closer. Rebecca, you wait until early afternoon. Make it look like you're just running an errand." She divided the documents between the two satchels, made sure each packet contained complete evidence. The journalist needed enough to write a damning story. The federal marshals needed enough to justify arrest warrants. Marcus took his satchel and tested its weight. "What do I tell the journalist?" "Tell him everything. The murders, the stolen wages, the illegal deals. Tell him the judge's son is dead because he tried to kill someone for exposing the truth." Marceline met his eyes. "Tell him we need help. Federal help. Before the judge destroys us all." Marcus nodded and slipped out through the kitchen's back door. He walked casually toward the main road, just another worker heading to town on plantation business. No one stopped him. The search continued throughout the afternoon. The judge's voice grew hoarser from shouting. His overseers combed through every building, every storage area. Marceline forced herself to stay visible, working in the main house kitchen, acting as normal as possible. When the judge passed through, she kept her eyes down, said nothing, moved quietly through her tasks like she always did. He barely glanced at her, too focused on finding his missing son. Rebecca left just after 2 o'clock. She took one of the workhorses, claiming she needed to fetch supplies from a farm 12 miles north. The overseer barely paid attention to her request, too busy searching. Marceline watched her ride away from the kitchen window, the satchel hidden beneath a canvas tarp tied to the horse's saddle. Rebecca sat straight in the saddle, moving at a steady pace that wouldn't draw suspicion. The afternoon dragged into evening. The judge grew more frantic, more unstable. He ordered every building searched again, threatened workers for information they didn't have. His face remained red and furious, veins standing out on his neck. By nightfall, he'd found nothing. Augustus had simply vanished. The judge retreated to his office. Through the windows, Marceline could see him pacing, drinking, slamming his fists on his desk. The careful control he always maintained had started to crack. Darkness settled over the plantation. Workers returned to their quarters, exhausted from a day spent pretending ignorance while being interrogated. Marceline helped serve the judge's dinner, placed it outside his office door when he refused to come out. She walked back to her own quarters as stars appeared overhead. Marcus would reach town by now, would have delivered the packet to the journalist. Rebecca would be miles north, riding through the night toward federal territory, both of them carrying evidence that could destroy Judge Hale completely. Marceline stood outside her door for a moment, listened to the night sounds, crickets singing, a dog barking somewhere distant, the normal sounds of evening. She thought about Augustus's body, hidden in the tobacco shed, about how long it would take the judge to think of checking there. Maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day. Not much time left. Hoofbeats echoed faintly from the main road. Rebecca, pushing her horse faster now that she'd gotten clear of the plantation. The sound grew quieter, fainter, then faded completely down the dirt road into darkness. 2 days passed like years. Marceline barely slept. She moved through her daily tasks with mechanical precision, preparing meals she couldn't taste, cleaning rooms that felt suffocating. Every sound made her flinch. Every footstep approaching her door might be the judge, finally knowing the truth. The other workers existed in the same state of tense waiting. They performed their duties with careful normalcy, but their eyes stayed watchful, alert, ready to run or fight or simply endure whatever came next. Judge Hale deteriorated hour by hour. On the first day after Augustus's disappearance, he maintained some composure, questioned workers with cold authority, searched buildings with methodical thoroughness. But by nightfall, when his son remained missing, something inside him started breaking. The second day brought worse behavior. He stormed through the fields at dawn, screaming at workers who couldn't possibly know anything, accused them of hiding Augustus, of conspiracy, of deliberately plotting against the Hale family. His face stayed red and swollen. His hands shook when he gestured. Thomas got slapped across the mouth for answering too slowly. An older woman named Ruth got shoved to the ground for looking directly at the judge's face. The overseers watched their employer with growing concern, uncertain how to handle his unraveling. By mid-morning of the second day, Judge Hale rode to the neighboring plantation owned by Silas Crawford. Marceline heard about it later from workers who'd been close enough to listen. The judge had barged into Crawford's house, demanding to know if anyone had seen Augustus, accusing Crawford of helping his son disappear out of jealousy, making wild claims about conspiracies among the planter class. Crawford had ordered him off the property. The judge returned to his own land more unstable than before. He locked himself in his office with a bottle of whiskey, emerged hours later to interrogate more workers, his speech slurred, his accusations increasingly nonsensical. Marceline kept herself visible, worked in the main house where the judge could see her. She couldn't risk him deciding she'd fled or hidden herself. That would trigger immediate suspicion, so she endured his presence. Brought him coffee he didn't drink, cleaned rooms he'd torn apart in rage, stayed quiet and small and invisible in the way she'd learned to survive. The third day arrived with heavy gray clouds and humid air that promised storms. Marceline was in the kitchen house when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving at a steady, purposeful pace up the main road. She stepped to the window. Her heart hammered against her ribs. 3 riders came into view. 2 wore dark blue uniforms she recognized from newspaper illustrations, federal marshals. The third man wore a brown suit and carried a leather satchel. He looked like he belonged in a city, not on a Mississippi plantation. The journalist. Workers throughout the plantation grounds noticed the arrivals. They slowed their tasks, watched carefully. Nobody spoke loud enough to be heard, but news rippled through the fields like wind through wheat. The marshals dismounted near the main house. One of them, tall with gray threading through his beard, pulled folded papers from his coat. Official documents, the kind that carried federal authority. The journalist stayed mounted, his eyes moving across the plantation with sharp attention to detail, taking everything in. Judge Hale emerged onto his front porch. He'd dressed carefully this morning, probably hoping to maintain appearances despite his deteriorating state. But his eyes looked wild, his movements jerky with barely controlled panic. "What the hell is this?" His voice carried across the yard. "You have no jurisdiction here. This is private property." The tall marshal climbed the porch steps without hesitation. "Judge Winton Hale, you know damn well who I am. Get off my land. I'm Deputy Marshal Collins. We have warrants for your arrest on charges of fraud, illegal trade practices, labor violations, and abuse." Collins unfolded the papers, held them out. "These documents authorize us to take you into federal custody." The judge's face went from red to pale in seconds. "That's absurd. I don't recognize your authority." "You can't." "We also have documented evidence from multiple witnesses." Collins's voice stayed level, professional. "Account ledgers, financial records, testimony. A northern newspaper is preparing to publish a full investigation into your activities. The journalist dismounted and approached the porch. Mr. Morrison, Chicago Tribune, I'd like to ask you about the systematic abuse of workers on your property. Judge Hale, specifically about the beatings, the stolen wages, and the children sold away from their families. Judge Hale stepped backward. His hand moved toward the door, like he might retreat inside, lock himself away from this nightmare. The second marshal moved to block the door. His hand rested on the pistol at his belt. Not threatening, just present. A reminder of authority. You can't do this, the judge said. His voice cracked. I have rights. I have standing in this community. People respect me. The evidence suggests otherwise. Collins gestured to his partner. We need to search the premises, and we need to question your household staff and workers. No, absolutely not. I refuse. The warrants grant us that authority, whether you cooperate or not. Workers had drifted closer now, not obviously gathering, but their movements through the yard brought them within hearing distance. Marceline saw Thomas near the stable, Ruth standing by the vegetable garden, Samuel pretending to repair a fence 50 yards away, all of them watching, waiting. The judge noticed them too. His eyes moved across their faces, searching for someone to blame, someone to punish. His gaze landed on Marceline in the kitchen house window. She didn't look away, didn't drop her eyes in submission like she'd done for years. She held his stare with the calm certainty of someone who'd already won. Understanding crashed across the judge's features. Horror, rage, betrayal. He lurched toward the porch steps, reaching for her even though 50 yards separated them. You, he snarled. You did this. You poisoned my son against me. You turned my own workers into spies. You. Both marshals grabbed him, one on each arm, restraining him with practiced efficiency. Judge Hale, you're making this harder than necessary, Collins said. The judge thrashed against their grip. All pretense of dignity collapsed into raw desperation. Let me go. I'll have your jobs. I'll write to Washington. You can't treat me like some common criminal. The evidence says we can. They pulled his arms behind his back, secured iron restraints around his wrists. The metallic click of the locks echoed across the yard. Workers watched in stunned silence. Some pressed hands to their mouths. Others gripped each other's arms, all of them trembling between fear that this might be reversed and relief that it might actually be real. The marshals led Judge Hale down the porch steps. He stumbled, off balance without his hands to steady himself, his face twisted with fury and humiliation. "Where's my son?" he shouted suddenly. "What did you do with Augustus? Where is he?" Nobody answered. Collins guided him toward a waiting carriage the marshals had brought. The journalist followed, writing quick notes in a small book, documenting everything. "My son!" the judge screamed. "Augustus! Augustus! Where are you?" His voice cracked, broke, became something closer to a sob than a shout. They loaded him into the carriage. He fought them weakly, all his strength drained by days of deterioration. The door closed behind him with a solid thunk. Through the carriage window, his face appeared, pressed against the glass, still searching the plantation grounds for his missing son. For answers he'd never get. The carriage rolled forward, wheels crunching on gravel. Workers stood motionless, watching it move down the long driveway, past the gates, onto the main road. The judge's face remained visible in the window until distance made it too small to see clearly. Then the carriage disappeared around a bend in the road. Gone. Near the stable, Thomas whispered something to the man beside him. The words spread quickly, passed from person to person in urgent, disbelieving murmurs. They took him. The judge is gone. They actually took him away. Marceline stayed at the kitchen house window. Her legs wouldn't hold her weight anymore. She sank into a chair, hands pressed flat against the table to keep them from shaking. The carriage rolled farther away, the sound of hoofbeats and wheels fading gradually into the distance. Workers began whispering louder now, their voices building, rising, becoming something close to hope. 1 week after the marshals took Judge Hale away, federal authorities arrived with more documents. The estate had been seized, all property, all land, all operation. They explained the process in careful legal language that most workers didn't fully understand, but the essential truth became clear. The plantation would be redistributed, reorganized, transformed into a cooperative farm managed by those who'd worked the land for generations without ever owning it. Papers were signed, new arrangements established, authority transferred from white hands to black ones for the first time in the property's history. The workers received it with cautious disbelief, waiting for the trick, the reversal, the moment when it would all be taken back. But days passed, and the authorities didn't return to undo what they'd done. Slowly, carefully, people began to believe it might be real. Marceline walked through the cotton fields on a mild afternoon. The plants grew thick and healthy, their bowls fat with white fiber ready for harvest. But this time, the people moving between the rows did so at their own pace, straightening their backs when they needed rest, drinking water whenever thirst struck. Nobody stood over them with threats or whips. Her mother walked beside her, slower than she used to move, her joints stiff from decades of brutal labor. But her face carried something Marceline hadn't seen there in years. Peace. Hard to believe it's real, Mama said softly. Keep expecting to wake up. It's real. Marceline touched her mother's arm gently. We made it real. They continued walking. The afternoon sun warmed their shoulders without burning. A breeze moved through the cotton plants with a sound like whispered conversations. Near the northern field boundary, Thomas and Samuel worked on repairing a fence, not because an overseer ordered it, but because they'd voted in yesterday's meeting to prioritize that task. Their voices carried across the open space, laughing about something. Actually laughing. Mama stopped walking, turned to face Marceline fully. What happened to Augustus? The question hung between them, direct, unavoidable. Marceline met her mother's eyes. He came after me, drunk and violent. I defended myself. And? He didn't survive it. Mama studied her daughter's face for a long moment, searching for guilt or triumph or regret, finding only tired acceptance. Good, Mama said finally, simply. Marceline felt something loosen in her chest. She'd been carrying the weight of that night like stones in her pockets. Not guilt exactly, but uncertainty about whether she should feel differently than she did. I don't celebrate it, she said quietly, but I don't apologize for it either. You did what you had to do. Mama squeezed her hand. Same as always, same as all of us. They resumed walking. The conversation settled into the soil behind them, acknowledged and released. At the main house, activity buzzed with new purpose. Ruth and 3 other women worked in the kitchen, preparing a communal dinner. Their voices rose and fell in easy rhythm, discussing recipes, arguing playfully about seasoning, taking their time because they could. The dining hall had been open to everyone. Long tables installed where workers could sit together and eat food they'd helped decide on. No more stolen scraps, no more separate meals determined by hierarchy. In the side yard, children ran freely. Their laughter carried on the breeze like music. No fear in their voices, no caution in their movements. Marceline watched a little girl chase a boy around the old oak tree, both of them shrieking with pure joy, the kind of joy that came from safety, from knowing they could be loud without consequence. She tried to remember the last time she'd heard children laugh like that on this land. Couldn't recall it. Maybe never. The front veranda had been transformed over the past week. Workers had hauled out chairs and benches, created a space where people could gather for meetings and discussions and planning sessions. Last night, they'd met there for hours, debating how to organize the harvest, how to distribute profits fairly, how to make decisions together instead of receiving orders from above. The conversations had been messy. People disagreed, argued, struggled to find consensus. But they were their disagreements, their arguments, their struggle to build something new. Marceline climbed the veranda steps as evening light stretched long shadows across the yard. She settled into one of the chairs, the same porch where Judge Hale had stood 3 weeks ago, ordering her life to change without her consent. Now it belonged to everyone, a shared space, a communal foundation. She heard footsteps behind her. Thomas emerged from the house carrying a stack of papers, account records they were learning to maintain themselves, figuring out bookkeeping and finances, and all the practical details of running a farm cooperatively. "We need you at tomorrow's meeting," he said. "People want your input on the winter planting schedule." "I'll be there." He nodded and moved past her, headed toward his own quarters, his own space, his own choices about how to spend his evening. The sun dropped lower, orange and pink spreading across the horizon. More children appeared in the yard, playing a game involving a ball and running and rules they made up as they went. Their parents watched from nearby, smiling, not tense, not constantly scanning for danger, just watching their children play. Marceline thought about Augustus sometimes, the weight of his body when he'd collapsed, the absolute silence that had followed, the fear that had gripped her in those first seconds. She thought about Judge Hale, too, his face pressed against the carriage window, still searching for his son, still believing his authority meant something. Both of them gone now, their power dismantled, their control erased. She didn't celebrate their destruction, didn't dance on their graves or crow about victory. The system that had created them and empowered them still existed beyond this plantation's borders, still grinding through countless other lives. But here, on this specific piece of earth, that system had been broken, and from its wreckage, something different was growing. A little girl ran past the veranda, her braids flying behind her. She tripped, stumbled, caught herself, kept running without missing a beat. Free. Actually free. Marceline watched her disappear around the corner of the house, heard her laughter echo back. The evening deepened into dusk. Lanterns were lit. People gathered for dinner. Voices rose in conversation and connection. Marceline stayed on the veranda a while longer, watching the yard transform into shadows and light, listening to the sounds of a community that belonged to itself. She'd done what survival required. Nothing more, nothing less. And somehow, impossibly, they'd built something new from the ashes. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.